You found it. Your home for the best content on your favorite team, the Fighting Tigers of LSU. Do us a favor. Subscribe to the channel. Leave your comments below. Be sure to smash that like button. After practice on Thursday, Brian Kelly did talk about his offensive line. And listen, my contention has been, and I think many of you probably agree, the two biggest question marks on this team, quarterback, offensive line. I don't even know that there's a debate about anything else because you're going into this fall camp without a settled quarterback position and with no identified starters on your offensive line. So here was Brian Kelly talking about his offensive line after day one.
You know, Dellinger's at guard. We want to see him at center a little bit. You saw Frazier at guard with Bradford, but, you know, Frazier could play tackle as well. And so we've paired them up on the right side because we think that they're interchangeable. You know, we like the fact that Bradford's got really good feet, but, you know, Frazier's got some length. So as it relates to the specifics of your question, those guys you're going to be center guard combinations right now. But I think it's important that there's some flexibility here for the first two and a half weeks, and we'll build the starting five, and then, you know, finding the rotation, you know, where you have, you know, your tackles solidified, the center position, and then I think we've got some really good depth, you know, that's building in this unit. But I think it's going to take a little while for it to kind of pan out over the next couple of weeks.
Did you hear what he said? Want to get tackle solidified, center, and then you sort of figure it out. The thing that stands out most to me about what Brian Kelly said there is probably the omission of Charles Turner. Not to say, by the way, that's not to say Turner isn't involved, isn't up for a job. But when he says they're working Garrett Dellinger at center and guard, they're cross-training Anthony Bradford as well, that kind of tells you they're still unsettled. I would have loved for Brian Kelly to say, hey, look, we thought Charles Turner did awesome in spring. We're starting there with him at center. That didn't happen. If you made me today, gave me a Sharpie and said, okay, you cannot change this pick, anybody on the offensive line, fill it out. The only one I'm putting down is Will Campbell at left tackle. That seems to be universally accepted. And I have some apprehension about that. I think he's going to be spectacular. I think he's going to be an awesome player, as do I think all of you and everyone else. It's still a big ask, asking a true freshman to go be a left tackle game one, snap one of his freshman season. I hope the kid crushes it. I was really hoping that Charles Turner would have established himself at center, but the fact that you're still cross-training guys there tells you you're not settled there. And that's concerning because Brian Kelly told you, he's like, we want to get our tackles and our center, and then you figure out all your rotational pieces, guys that can play inside or out. That's maybe Bradford. That's maybe Dellinger. That's, you know, the other interesting thing, Miles Frazier. Remember, Miles Frazier, coming from FIU, was a freshman All-American at tackle. The fact that they're training him inside tells you that maybe they feel like they have better options at tackle right now than him. Also did not mention Tremont Shorts, who was an FCS All-American. Is he no longer being cross-trained at center? He was one of the 5 guys that they worked at center during the spring. So they're still figuring out a lot there on the offensive line. But, man, I really, really, really would have loved to have heard, or would like to hear at some point, a solidified center spot. We just talk about it all the time, how important that job is, not only because you're part of the battery with the quarterback that touches the ball every play, but you're also making the calls on the interior of the line. It is so important that they get that sorted out sooner than later. Receiver is also something that we've talked about is an undeniable strength, but you got to have Kayshon Boutte be that dude. First and foremost, number 3, Muse, if it would, here was an update on Kayshon Boutte's health from Brian Kelly.
His player load was pretty high today. It's probably a little bit more than we maybe thought that we wanted for him, but he handled it well, and I expect him to even continue to build on that. So yes and yes to all those things, and excited that he's with us.
Wearing that number 7 jersey. Good to see Kayshon Boutte running around. The cut, though, from Brian Kelly that I think got the most attention was when he was asked about Boutte's potential. Give a listen.
This was my first glimpse at him, quite frankly, and he's an explosive player. He's learning how to practice. You know, today he was a guy that I had to, remind him a little bit about how to practice the right way. But, he's so committed. He's worked so hard. I'm excited, for him, really, because you can see his potential is one of, can he be the best receiver in the country? I think he can be, but you got to go out and do it. But I just like the fact that he is totally committed to what we're doing and how we're doing it. And now he got a chance to see how we practice for the first time. And, he picked that up today as well.
When Brian Kelly's relationship with Kayshon Boutte has been hot and cold, I think we all understand that. The first thing Brian Kelly ever said when he was asked about him was, I know his last name, right? And then it was, he's a great kid, but we need him to be re-engaged. They go through the offseason. Obviously, Kayshon Boutte stays. He rehabs. He looks fantastic. He gets the number 7 jersey. For his practice, you hear Brian Kelly say, I had to remind him how to practice. And I think part of that made a lot of people's antenna go up because they have been sort of hot and cold. But the way Brian Kelly stated at the end, I think sort of maybe add a little more clarity. Y'all, in a very literal sense, Kayshon Boutte has not practiced since October. He got hurt at the beginning of October against Kentucky. Didn't practice the rest of the year. Didn't go through spring. I mean, this is the first time he's been on a practice field, like in a formal practice, under Brian Kelly, and in almost a year. So I think it's natural that he's going to have to learn what the expectation is at practice under Brian Kelly, which is going to be different than what they did under Ed Ogeron and prior. So, but to hear Brian Kelly say he's been so committed, Brian Kelly said he's excited about him. He has the potential to be the best wide receiver in the country. He's explosive. He gushed, he glowed with praise for Kayshon Boutte. And look, we think LSU's wide receiver core is the deepest position on the team. Their numbers there aren't what you'd normally like, but every receiver they have has incredible potential. When you're talking about guys like Brian Thomas and Chris Hilton as your 5 and 6 wide receivers, that's amazing. Normally, you'd like to have 11, 12 scholarship receivers on your roster. You don't necessarily have that, but what you have is amazing talent in the numbers that you do have, and of course, led by Kayshon Boutte. One of those receivers that we mentioned also is Jack Besh. Brian Kelly did run through who is limited in fall camp, and Besh is one of them.
Besh is limited. He's coming back. I think he's making the progress necessary from shin splints, and I think he'll be, available for us in the next couple of days. But he's really the only one that has the kind of limitations. I think Tolan, had the discectomy. He's making great progress. Those would be the 2 guys that are kind of on a pitch count, if you will, if that's, if I can use that phraseology in terms of they're coming along, but they're not quite there yet, but they've made pretty good progress.
So, look, you don't worry about Jack Besh. I mean, he's going to be fine. Shin splints, he'll get through that. And then Tolan is DeMario Tolan, the freshman linebacker, who, quite honestly, is going to be a little buried on this depth chart anyway at linebacker. So bring him along slowly. One more, and this is where Brian Kelly, it's number 11, Muse, if we could. This is where Brian Kelly mentions the other linebacker. Guys that were not here in spring who stood out day one, give a listen.
We hadn't seen 7 before, 7 Banks, obviously he was out here today in a little bit of a limited fashion. Obviously, having Perkins out here today, you get a flash and see him. I was over watching tackling drills, and, he's got a suddenness to him, that's quite different than some of the other players. So, I think there's a couple of players that kind of flash at you. I like the way Bordelon moves around, athletic. He's a big, strapping kid that moves well. Emory, the local kid from Catholic, Emory Jones, he's a big, physical kid too. So those guys kind of jump out at you a little bit, that they look more than just, the typical, freshman coming in. These guys are physically mature and handle themselves, very well.
A quick thought on the 4 guys that Brian Kelly mentioned. One, 7 Banks, we probably haven't talked about enough, quite honestly. I think we've talked so much about Bernard-Converse, who's gotten a lot of preseason accolades, and then Mekhi Gardner, who is on a lot of people's draft boards and Pro Football Focus. We went through the top 25 cornerbacks in the country. LSU was one of only 2 schools with 2 on the list, and it was Bernard-Converse and Mekhi Gardner. So could 7 Banks find himself as a starter? I mean, I think that certainly is up for grabs when you hear Brian Kelly say that. The 2 offensive linemen, Bordelon and Emory Jones, the future at that position, Y'all, as uncertain as it is now, can we all agree, like, the future at that position is amazing? You're probably going to start a freshman in Will Campbell. Fitzgerald West, is kind of plugging in at center and learning that job. But, man, Emory Jones is ready-made. And, Bordelon was one of the lowest-rated prospects in the class. But Brian Kelly's a big, strapping kid, really athletic. I mean, they got him running at left tackle. There's a lot to like there. And when you look at what's in the pipeline as well, and the possibility always of hitting the transfer portal, I like Brad Davis is a great coach. I like the potential, the future of this line. They're only going to keep getting better and better and better and better, even if it takes them a little while to find their footing here early in camp. But Harold Perkins is the other one, where Harold Perkins is on the updated roster is at 6'2", 220. I want to say that again. He's at a true freshman linebacker at 6'2", 220. When you hear Brian Kelly say he has a suddenness about him, I mean, it sounds like you're talking about one of the great linebackers that have come through here. If it was Damone Clark a year ago, I mean, you hesitate to use Devin White and Kevin Minter, guys that were All-Americans and you're really good NFL players and won awards. But that's what you expect when you sign a 5-star. You expect him to look like Harold Perkins looks coming in. I have sort of just been under the assumption that the biggest question at linebacker is Baskerville. Baskerville's your only guy with all the skins on the wall, but he also was running third team in spring. Clearly, he had a lot to prove, if it was in the classroom or whatever, to these coaches. They know he can play at this level. He's just got to prove that he's worthy of the reps right now. So if it's Mike Jones, if it's Greg Penn, who they're very high on, and then Baskerville, that's a pretty good 3 to start. And you brought in Colby Fields from South Carolina. You brought in Wes Weeks from Virginia. And then you've got Perkins and Tolan, who's injured right now. It's plausible to think if Perkins – I'll give you the Kendall Beckwith analogy or the example. Back when Kendall Beckwith was a freshman, they just needed to get him on the field. So they put him on the field in third down, put his hand in the dirt, and say, go get the passer. And when you got into 2014 – it was, DJ Welter was playing middle linebacker, but it was undeniable that Beckwith was the superior, physically talented. I mean, he's a 5-star. He was incredible. Guy was an All-American. But Welter started the season because they knew Welter was always going to be in the right place. He knew how to get everybody lined up. He was just so solid. But Beckwith had this enormous ceiling. You just weren't sure where, if he was going to have the missed assignments, the mental assignments early in his career. And they got to the point ultimately where I said, forget it, we need the better talent on the field. And they did that. So I'll be interested to see if Perkins follows a similar path. If at some point this year, maybe it's next year, they just look and go, he's just too talented. He's got to be on the field. Put him out there. And in some or what capacity we'll see. So he's wearing number 10. You can't miss him. I mean, he is kind of the freak show that fills out the uniform as a true freshman. So exciting to watch these guys actually get out there. Well, I'll get my first look at them on Monday. No media availability Friday, Saturday, Sunday at practice, but we will get to look at practice Monday morning. So we'll be out there, and we'll get I'll get my first look at the team on Monday, and we'll certainly give you a full recap Monday on the show. Hey, thanks so much for watching. Please leave your comments. I love to interact, and be sure to hit the red subscribe button below.